the camera was updating. It always seems to happen. Never when the recording is done, but always when you're about to start it, it wants to update. But welcome to week 8, our final week. We have been going through this process now for a while, walking through these stages together, and we lost a stage. That's fine. We remember by now. And hopefully along the way, my whole intention with wanting to show these things to you is to help you to see perhaps where you feel most at home right now. Knowing that this is a model, and as the mathematician George Bach said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So know that this model is wrong, but it can be really useful. And if you're able to look at it and to see sort of a place where you feel like, oh, yes, this does feel familiar, this does feel comfortable, this does feel where I am, maybe that could help you to center yourself on your journey and to figure out, maybe if you are starting to feel stuck where you are, how to then move to another place to get unstuck, to continue to grow. Because, I don't know, I'm the kind of person who feels like, why else would you be alive if you're not doing something with it? I don't find a whole lot of meaning in this life from just sitting around and consuming emptiness. I'd like to actually live while I'm alive. So I hope that you've been able to find yourself somewhere. So let me give just a brief overview again, and as I do, maybe try to think about where you feel like maybe you are, or where you feel like you are most often, I should say. So stage 1 is that simple, naive puppy dog relationship with God, a recognition of God that comes from your knowledge of your great need or of an experience of great awe. It is unencumbered by doctrine and theology and identity with groups, and it is simply a pure and easy sort of a faith. It is one that is filled with joy, but also kind of can be at times shallow because it's not grounded in anything but your experience. And then once your experience changes, then, oh my goodness, there's nothing there underneath of it. So oftentimes once we've reached that point, we find ourselves a community or a teacher or a leader or an ideology or a faith or something that we can plant our flag on, something we can grow our roots into, some kind of soil that will nourish us. Often somebody who can put words to your soul's deepest longings. When you read that book or hear that sermon and you go, oh, that's it. That's what I've been feeling. Yes, I'm not alone. And you feel this need to suck up all you can in this discipleship stage of learning and growth and identity. You tend to start to take on the mannerisms and the verbiage and the nomenclature of whatever group or person you're a part of. I can tell you when I listen to certain preachers or podcasters or people like that, I'll start to take on the way that they talk and speak. That I know that this was especially true for the church that I had come from, where they were a church of people who were trying to be a church for the unchurched. And so they changed all the words of everything. So it's not a worship service, it's a public meeting. It's not a Bible study, it's a cell group. It's not a sermon, it's a talk. They would say things like, we're doing this thing together. That's a big phrase that they would use. And so you start to take those things on, and that then becomes a way of affirming your identity. So that when you stop feeling your relationship with God, you still have a sense of belonging to something. There's something to fall back on there. That can also then tend to get a little schismatic, a little us versus them. So you don't want to get stuck there. But usually once we've been fed and once we've recognized what we can offer back to the community, we want to start working, we want to start doing. We've been fed enough that now it's time for us to feed others. We move into this productive stage that is wonderful. And most people who are serious about their faith end up being here for a very long time. It's a place of safety and contentment, of identity and purpose. You have a purpose for being here, a reason for existing in this community, a way of accessing God. You know, at its worst, you kind of start to act like you need to earn your faith and your salvation and like earn your keep. I think I mentioned before my new favorite illustration that came from St. John of the Cross, that God is the greatest painter in the world, world-renowned painter, and says to you, meets you in the street and goes, "My goodness, you're perfect. I must paint you. I have to paint you. Your cheekbones, your eyebrows, everything about you is perfect. Can you come to my studio later?" And you're like, "Oh my gosh, the world's greatest painter wants to paint me? Thinks I'm beautiful? I've never thought of myself like that at all. This is wonderful." And so you go to the studio and you sit there and you're posing and you're waiting and they're painting and you just feel so grateful to even be there. But after a while, you're like, I feel like I'm not contributing to this. And I need to do something for him. So you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna shift. Maybe this way. Maybe this way's a little bit better. What do you think? And God's like, all right, yep, that's fine too. That's okay, yep. And then you're like, well, wait, what if I put on a different hat? What do you think about that? And what maybe I could help draw a little bit, do the outline for you so you can go take a nap or something. I want to help. And then eventually God is like, all right, I appreciate you want to do this with me, but I need you to just relax. You can't do this. You can be here, and I love you, and I want you to be a part of this, but let me work. The writer of the Cloud of Unknowing says that God doesn't need you. God doesn't need you to do anything. All God needs you to do is to shut the door, make sure nobody gets in, and keep the flies out while God does the work. And so we're invited to co-create with God, knowing that God is still doing 99.999% of the work. And it's more like when my son helps me with the grocery shopping than anything else. It makes him feel good. But I don't need him there. So we can stay here for a very long time, and it's a wonderful place. However, over time, we do tend to kind of find the edges of it, right? And when we have found the edges of it, that's usually fine until a crisis hits. Some kind of disruption in life. And that usually shakes you into realizing that, oh my goodness, I've actually not been very content here for some time. And that could be, I have a crisis, my answers don't match anymore, or it could be, I'm just bored here now. And I realize that now, I'm bored. And so we move inside, we move into this place of introspection, of rediscovering who we are on the inside, of maybe even deconstructing some of what this community had said to us, the things we had just believed without questioning. This might be a painful process. You might feel like you're losing your friends or losing yourself or backsliding. This might be an exciting process in which you're finally discovering some new truths that you haven't been able to admit to yourself for a while. Whatever it is an inward journey that requires you and God, and it requires you to be very honest and open about yourself. And when you're able to do that, and you're able to push past this wall, this barrier that is built of all the things that hold us back, then we move into this life of moving outward. Don't remember exactly the word that was used there. It is a movement outward at that point. The outward journey, that's what it is. In which you have met God in the darkest places. You have met God in the truest of places. And you are filled with this desire to go spread that to others. It's a slow process. It's not like a light comes on. I mean, it might be for you, but it's not always like that. It's usually a process of growing at that point. You realize why you want to grow. I know for me, after I dropped out of seminary the first time in this pit of depression and despair and total lostness, I was in a very dark place. And then when I decided to reapply to a different seminary years later, it was like going back the second time. I wanted to learn these things, but for very different reasons. When I went the first time, I was doing it to get through it because I felt like I had to get somewhere, or maybe even to learn some fun facts or something. But the second time I went through, it was like, I get to learn these things so that I can bring them to someone else. And it was this sort of, I have faces now of people that I want to bless with this thing that I'm given. So I saw myself more as like an intermediary of spiritual wisdom and knowledge than somebody who is like the Dead Sea. It's just absorbing everything. There's a bit more of steadfastness, of peace, of a connection with the divine in that time. You're able to withstand a bit more. There's more joy in your spiritual life, in your prayers. And so the transition then from here up into stage 6 is a subtle, slow transition. It's one that is just kind of amplifying many of the things that I've just said about stage 5. So whereas here, you're maybe a little bit more likely to try something new and dangerous for God. Stage 6, you just do it without realizing it. Somebody over here in stage 3 might give out of their excess, might give of their time or money because they want to bless others. Somebody here is probably going to end up giving more than they probably should, at times anyway, because they feel really drawn to something, and faith is just a lot easier. I don't want to say somebody in that stage 6 is a reckless fool or anything, but there's a sort of easy willingness to do what God asks of you, because when you've moved into this place, this life of love, what the mystics call this union with the divine, there's not as much of a barrier between God's will and your will. It is easier to know when you are following God's path, and to know the will of God over your life. Discernment just becomes a whole lot easier. There's a lot less second guessing. The way that the author summarizes it is that at this stage we reflect God to others in the world more clearly and consistently than we ever thought possible. We let our light shine in such a way that God is given the credit and the thanks. In many ways, at this stage, we represent an extension of stage 5. Yet the characteristics of stage 5 are more complete, just as stage 3 represents a more confident, fuller version of stage 2. We have lost ourselves in the equation and at the same time have truly found ourselves. There's a wonderful visual image that Saint Teresa of Avila paints in her book, The Interior Castle. Have I mentioned Saint Teresa before? She imagines that all of our souls are like a castle made out of diamond, a clear, crystalline castle. And imagine the sort of, she's from the 16th century, so imagine like a castle compound, not just like the castle at the Disney or something. And in the very center of this castle is a light. And that light is God. And it's in the middle. It's in the center. So when you're outside of the castle, you can barely see the light. And the the issues of the world, the noise of the courtyard, everything is very distracting. When you enter into the gates, you can see a faint light in the middle. There's still a lot of distractions. There's a lot of what she calls demons and lizards that are distracting you and harming you along the way. But then there are seven stages as you move inward for her, that each one along the way, there are fewer and fewer demons and lizards and temptations, because the demons and lizards and temptations can't stand the light at the center. And so the farther in you get to each mansion along the way, the fewer awful temptations there are, and the brighter the light gets. And I like that as an image. Because it doesn't get easier. It's like there's fewer temptations from evil, but being in the presence of that harsh brightness is difficult. It's overpowering. It requires things of you that are difficult to give up. You stop battling with external forces as much as you start battling just internally as you move further into the castle. Teresa is somebody who, she struggled a lot. She didn't start really getting her faith until she was in her late 40s, and she'd been living in a convent since she was 16. She really fought her way to her faith. But I don't love the image entirely, because it's a one-way street. You go from the outside to the inside, and then you're there for her. And I don't really vibe with that. And maybe that makes sense if you are locked in a convent for your entire life. But for those of us who are still out in the courtyard most of the time, I feel like our lives move in more cyclical ways. But I like the image that when you move closer to God in a more unitive way, there's fewer distractions around you. There's fewer temptations. You're not all that interested in wealth anymore. Not all that interested in fame and fortune and the accolades of others. That doesn't really bother you. So the distractions are gone the further you get in. But the further you get in, the brighter that light gets, and the more it exposes inside of you. So then the more you are then convicted of your own shortcomings, and the more obvious everything becomes, the more vulnerable you have to be, the more hurt you have to face that you have buried down. But God is there with you in those moments. And somebody who has reached this level of connection with God has a kind of peace through the pain that I don't know what to say about. It's not wonderful, it's not good, it's not great. It's helpful, I suppose. So most would then think, and I think a lot of people do imagine, Teresa does at least, that once you've kind of reached the center, you've reached the center. You've now reached enlightenment. You are beyond the cycles of the natural way of doing things. I don't love that way of thinking about things. That it's a straight line from immaturity to enlightenment, and now you're enlightened and that's it. Because it's hubristic is what it is. It's imagining that we, with our meat brains, can fathom the depths and heights and widths of eternity, and that's so prideful. There's always somewhere to learn and always something to grow, and no matter how close you are with God, you are still a human. So on this side of heaven, you're only going to get so close. So probably a good way to draw it then would be more like that. And then onward and onward and onward. And I've often wondered, and there's not a whole lot, at least these authors only mention that perhaps a spiral might be more helpful than a circle. It's written about a lot more in something called spiral dynamics, but that's more about human development than faith development. But the idea being you've reached some kind of enlightenment. You've reached a place of unitive peace, connection with God in a level that you didn't know before, a kind of overwhelming sense of comfort and goodness and peace and connection. It's a good place to be. Over time, being in that place, that becomes your ground. That becomes your ground of being again. And we then keep going. That just becomes one step closer down into the depths. They talk about a spiral up to heaven. I like to think of it more in the spiral digging down into the depths of our souls. So this then kind of becomes a sort of naive recognition of God. You've experienced God in this deeper way than you ever have before, but this is based on this relationship with God, this experience of God, this knowledge of God, your own lack, of your own need, and of God's wonder and awe. And then you maybe move a little further and you start to ask more questions of that new level of consciousness. You start to want to learn more and to dig deeper into that new level of consciousness, of spiritual awareness. And you maybe start reading from some other spiritual leaders. You maybe find some other tradition that you had never thought about before. Now suddenly you're interested in you've met some Catholic priest, and you're like, I have never heard somebody talk about the saints in this way before, and I'm so drawn to this, that, the other. And now you've moved into this other level of doing this, and you then go on a different sort of a journey inward of connecting with something, of drawing the wisdom out of it, of giving back, of kind of deconstructing the things that were good. You can almost think of it less like deconstructing at this stage and more like digesting, because you're not, having gone through the process at least once, you start to believe that you're going to be okay on the other side. You've ripped it all apart at least once, and you found God on the other side. So when you get to another place of the dark night of the soul, well, now you have memory of a time that it came out okay. So you're more likely to do it again. And each time you do it, the deconstruction becomes more like digesting, getting rid of the bad parts, keeping the good parts, and going around and around and around. And I think somebody had asked before, how many times can a person expect to make this journey in their life? And I have no idea. It could be a lot, it could be one, it could be none, it could be 5. A person, it's just a model. So everyone is kind of on their own in that regard. But I will tell you, after you've gone through all stages, at least once, it does get easier. Just in having living memory of the times that you went through and everything was good and fine and okay. Thoughts? I see some furrowed brows. Yeah.
When you asked originally earlier on something about, you asked the question, where are you?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you're asking us is to consider the chart and where we fit onto that chart. And my reaction was, and I think you've gotten eventually to it, that there are many days in which I live when I'm so busy that I can't contemplate anything like this. It's things are going on. I mean, you're living, but then there are days that are more open and there's more time to do contemplation. And at that point, I realize that on any given day like that, I may go through all 6 stages and recognize that I'd start in a different place each time, but I'm going through it. So I can't identify where I am in any particular stage based upon that.
So the authors would say that totally normal to move around, to bounce around, to experience multiple ones at the same time. But generally speaking, there is one in which you spend more time.
Because
Think of
you're
it like
comfortable there?
Think of it like a heat map, right? Like there might be some heat in each one, but one of them is a lot brighter than the others, because that's where you're processing most right now, in whatever place you are in your life. So I can tell you in the past couple of months, feeling like I can identify with almost all of them, but most of the time I'm somewhere here between 3 and 4. But I think that's probably where my home comfort spot is right now. But I've been all over the place.
I guess I look at the stages kind of like an education. And in stage 1, you're in high school and you get a slight introduction to quantum mechanics. And you think, wow, that's interesting. So you go to college in stage 2 and you say, I'm going to take physics. And you take a freshman physics course. And you think, well, that's interesting. And a little more. So you get to stage 3 and you're sophomore level physics course. And you look at stage 4, and that's a senior level course. And you look at that and think, I don't even understand that. I don't know how I will get there. And 5 and 6 are master's and doctorates levels. And that's kind of what I feel like I'm at stage 2.8. And I've understand where I am. But I'm a little scared to try to go to stage 4. I'm not sure my faith will stand that. I'm afraid my faith will fail. I don't have confidence in myself. So like you said, I'm comfortable in stage 3, basically, where I'm at. But I want to try to move forward, but maybe I'm hesitant for fear or lazy, one or the other. And I want to try to do that, but you got to make a commitment to do that. You got to say, okay, I'm going to work at this, just like I want to work to do something else better, and so I got to work at it and see what happens.
That education image resonates with me. I imagine then after this is like your PhD work, and now you're doing postdoc work, and now you're in research stages, and now you're getting published, and now you're working on some new problem, and you're using the things you learned back in high school and college, but you're then applying them to move through the different stages of the real world applications of those things. So that's where my mind went with the spiral after that. But you're not alone. There's a reason, I think, why most longtime church folks kind of set up shop here. This is terrifying, especially if it's the first time going through. It feels like you might lose it all. And I can't tell you won't. I can only tell you that for me, the image that came to my mind when I was first going through this, and it just came to me one day, of one of those houses at the shore that are up on stilts. You know what I mean? The big up poles and all. But one that maybe it's in a lower floodplain. So the waters have gone through it quite a bit, and the wood on those stands has started to rot and it's started to break a bit. And the owner of the house has nailed 2x4s to it to try to strengthen the places where it's starting to crack, and has just nailed whatever he had lying around, scrap metal and pieces of fencing and duct tape and anything that he had lying around to try to make sure that these posts were fine. And as long as you were in the house, everything seemed okay. Well, you're in the living room, you're sleeping, you don't see them. But every time you would go outside and would see it from the outside, you would have a sinking feeling that it's going to fall at any time. But if we don't think about it and just go back to bed, it's going to be okay. And I realized you can only fix it so many times until you kind of have to call in a contractor, take your stuff out, salvage what you can, and rebuild. And it just kind of realized my own personal faith had gotten to that point. It was collapsing and I was not acknowledging it. And it was really only when I acknowledged that it was a mess that I was able to get through it. So I would encourage you that your faith probably won't make it. And that's the point. Because your faith maybe needs to fall apart a little bit. Maybe those supports need to come down because they're not good supports anymore. They're supports that you built or that you were given by teachers along the way, and they worked for a while, but now they don't work anymore. And so we honor them. We're thankful that they served us for this long, and we take them down and we move on. And we trust that if there was ever something to it, if there was ever really a God behind the whole thing, if there was ever a higher power that was behind any of this, then that higher power will still be there. And that higher power, whatever you will end up calling it, will help to rebuild something that will work in this stage of your life. And trusting that it's okay, that you might not call that higher power the same name anymore. You might not feel comfortable in the same denomination or in the same church or wherever anymore, but that God is good and will pull you through. It's a leap of faith, but it's one that I think will either happen by your own free will or one that will happen to you. I mean, all that to say, it's much better on the other side. Just a wonderful encouragement.
It's worth the gamble.
So it's because it's not a gamble. You'll lose something along the way, but Scripture is filled with images of being purified by fire, being the chaff blown away, the sheep and the goats separated. It's that we have things, excess that needs to be cut away, so that the good, true, and the inside can come through. And it's not a good process, it's not a fun process, but it's so much better on the other side. Any other thoughts or questions?
I have a question. I'm not sure it's that well put together, so you can help me through it as the words come out. So, say 3 happens, you move into 4, whether you're pushed or bored, something snaps and you just start diving inward, you get to the wonderful wall. You said a lot of people lose it then. and some people make it through and kind of get to the other side. Does anyone truly lose it, or does it just get reframed to the point of like it seems like you're out of the cycle, like check please, like I'm out, or is it just so different but you're still a part of this cycle? If that makes any sense, like yeah, I'm not sure if that makes sense.
I'm thinking about some of my high school friends who we all grew up in the same fundamentalist upbringing, and they hit a period together of this sort of intense deconstruction, and they all came out as virulent atheists. Like, we are done with religion altogether, God is a lie. And they became like evangelical atheists. Like, it's not okay that they don't believe in God, they don't want you to believe in God either. And that's all they'll talk about. And it was obnoxious for a while. And I think they imagined themselves just, yep, I'm done. I'm out of here. And some of them, I can think of at least one of them who just kind of kept trying to seek what is true after that. And trying to, through philosophy, through history, through maybe like contemplative practices, rather meditation, this sort of like trying to find some other avenue of deeper connection, trying to answer those questions that found him there in a different way. And just the past year or so, anytime that I'm together with him and he's been drinking, he'll corner me. I have a question for you. And he'll just like pour out these things where it's so clear, it's so obvious he is still dealing with the hurt from that fundamentalism. He has not been able to forgive them, to move on, to deal with it. And so he's not able to move on. And so he keeps trying to find other, I think maybe he's in a secular sort of a way, coming back up here, trying to find another group that will help him to answer the questions or to find some kind of belonging or ownership. But it keeps coming down to this, which was that hurt he experienced as a child growing up in a fundamentalist place, which pastors, father, a million things to unpack there. And so I don't think he's ever gone past that, but I think that because he keeps seeking, he's still moving around in here. If somebody were to hit this, and I can't speak to all of them, but they're just like, I'm done with God and I'm not thinking deeply anymore, then maybe they can just hang out. Maybe. I'm not in their souls. I'm not the kind of person who could just check out and get busy with other things. But I've been trying to encourage him anytime I've talked to him that like, maybe you should see a therapist about this, like somebody who specializes in religious trauma, because this thing is holding you back from discovering whatever truth it is. I don't know if that answered your question or if that was even your question, but.
Oh, that was great. I didn't know what I was asking, so that was a great answer. That's good.
I don't know if I mentioned last time or in a sermon, but it was the writings of Rob Bell that really helped me here in learning to have gratitude for my religious upbringing. Because I experienced quite a bit of spiritual abuse that took me a while to decompress, to come back from. I think a lot of my psychological problems have to do with the way that Jesus was given to me. But learning to be grateful to them for my love of Scripture, for my strong sense of right and wrong, for the community that they gave me, for the love that they showed me when they did show it to me. Learning to be grateful for those things and then to forgive them for the other things. Recognizing that given the worldview and frame that they had, they did what they thought was right. I was a dangerous heretic. I could lead people astray. When you believe that the line between heaven and hell is that fine and just one wrong belief could send you into eternal damnation, of course they're going to kick me out, because I am potentially damning dozens of souls. So in their framework, they were doing the right thing. And I don't agree with the framework, and it hurt me a lot. But I've come to forgive them, even though nobody has ever apologized, and to learn to be grateful for the things they gave me. That took me a long time to get there. Final thoughts or questions? We are at our end.
What's next?
I got your email. I like the, well, I'll turn off the recording. Goodbye, YouTube people.